Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we will be taking on the topic of psychics and readers, what to look for in a reader, what to expect from readings, and much more. Before we get started on a topic dear to our heart, Michael has a few announcements.
Hey, everyone. First of all, we're getting into our holiday season, so we have one more show this year, and that's our good friend David Oman, and he'll be talking about his new book, Ghosts of Cielo Drive, and he lives in the haunted house close to where the Manson murders happened, and Krista and I have been there many times doing ghost hunting and so forth. It's always been a lot of fun, and he's a character. We always have a great time visiting with him, so that should be next week. Our apologies, our friend Humberto couldn't make it this week. He was to be our guest, so we're going to reschedule him for the spring. And then we're going to have a little hiatus. We've got our cosmic weather coming up at the end of the year for January. And then that should be our last cosmic weather because we're going to change the format a little bit in the new year. And we're going to go to a new series called Spell It Out. And it'll be a little astrology, but it's going to be a whole lot more than that. So check in for that. And then our first show back in January will be famous occultist Lon Milo Duquette. And he's going to talk about his tarot deck and his new book he put out. And gosh knows what else may come up. You know, he's very much a very respected authority on Crowley and a whole lot of other things in terms of ceremonial magic. So and that should be very interesting. And then we have Mama Kathy coming back. We're going to have Jim McGrath back in the new year. We've got more ghost hunters coming up. We've got all kinds of cool stuff. So check out our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, sixthsensesociety.com. If you guys want to support our show, there's a little donation button there, and for the price of a cup of coffee every month, $1.99, you can become a subscriber to our show or a supporter. And then if you wish to really support our show, $4.99 a month, we appreciate it. It really helps to cover our costs and so forth to produce the show and maybe give us a little money to upgrade our equipment and whatnot down the road. And if you can't afford that, then we're just pleased to have you come by anyway. And we definitely want to keep this show open to everyone. So we're not looking to make it something where it's only for those who can afford to pay. That kind of goes against our philosophy. So enjoy it. And if you can support us a little bit, that's great. And if not, then we're still more than happy to have you tag along. So with that, we're going to get back to our topic. And this, as Krista said, is near and dear to our hearts. Krista and I have been doing readings now for 24 years almost, I think, professionally.
Yeah. Yes.
And we would estimate that between the two of us, we've probably done 40 to 50,000 readings. So we are a little familiar with the topic. And the idea for this show actually came up at an event I was at recently where there was someone talking to another reader about going to a different reader when they were a few years ago. And that reader told her that she was cursed and that she was always going to suffer and never have love unless she, of course, gave this person a ton of money. And so when Humberto couldn't make it, I thought this is a perfect time to talk about some of this stuff because it's something that Krista and I are passionate about, is not just reading, but sort of trying to get rid of some of these things that we think are very unhealthy with reading. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Krista, and I'll be chiming in a lot today. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Just a quick correction. Lon's book has not come out yet that we're going to be talking about. It's about an introduction to the occult, and it comes out February 1st. So just that's the release date. Well, so first of all, I just made a kind of list of pointers that I would say I'd like to talk about how first to find a competent reader. And I'm going to use the word competent because there's a lot of exaggeration in metaphysics. And, yes, I think a reading can be particularly amazing on occasion, and a reader can have a great moment with someone. Sometimes it seems like you do have a rapport with certain people, just like in life. But I think that I'm going to use the word competency because that's what I think, if you're looking at the whole profession of reading, we're looking for is competent readers, and hopefully people get better as they do it more. So probably the best, most effective way is word of mouth. There is nothing to replace word of mouth. If your friend has gone to a reader, this is how I always found readers when I was younger. Is a friend of mine told me they went to this reader. My father introduced me to the wonderful astrologer Stephen Forrest because he found him. But of course, someone has to be the first to find the reader. So, but I don't want to. I want to emphasize that word of mouth is very powerful in the reading business. We still have people coming to us because of word of mouth and referrals after many, many years. They are still referring people, and I do that with the readers I've gone to. I still refer people to people I've been going to, and they may not know it, but I do because they're that good. So I would say in this day and age, of course, there's a lot of social marketing and social media that puts readers out in the world, and that is definitely a mixed blessing. One of the problems with any kind of marketing on social media or Facebook is that it may or may not tell the truth. But there's definitely ways you can kind of penetrate into what the person is putting out there and kind of assess and sort of see, if you really think they are the right reader for you. I personally would recommend, if possible, at least talking on the phone with someone first, just to get a sense of who they are, and better in person, because I think we all have good instincts. And there is something legitimate about you like the person's energy some reason. You feel a rapport with them. You're talking to them and you feel like, I kind of feel like this person can help me. But even then, that's not enough. What you want to do is really find out a little bit about the reader. And by who the reader is, so perhaps their background. And the background doesn't have to be simply about their tool. It can be about sort of where they're coming from. And just so you get a sense of sort of who they are. And then you certainly want to look at what the reader, he or she puts out as what they can do. And because one of the things that does happen is sometimes people just go to a person that doesn't do something, but they just didn't look at the presentation the reader gave, the marketing. There's some readers that don't like to predict. And it's going to be very disappointing to you if you go to someone that doesn't even do that tool. And hopefully they'll tell you, they'll say, I don't do that. But even then, maybe they've come a long way or they're already ready to get the reading, so they're really let down. So you want to think about sort of also why you want to go to a reader. Do you want to just go because it's fun, which is perfectly fine? Do you have specific issues you want to look at? Are you seeking a certain kind of reader, perhaps someone that is a medium that speaks with the dead? I think that the more you have at least a little bit of a sense of sort of why you're going to the reader, it's helpful for you to even choose the right reader. So I'm going to let you chime in a little, Michael, with some of the thoughts I put out so far.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is actually really important for sure. And obviously different readers have different skill sets. And, some of us love to predict. And talking about prediction again just for a second, too, and keeping a healthy mindset to that. It's not an infallible science in the sense that reading is very static, life is dynamic. And whenever a reader makes a prediction, what we're really talking about is probability of all the things which we believe could occur, the thing which is the most likely to occur at the most likely time that it is to happen and so forth. But occasionally the second most likely thing happens. But I always use the example, it's no different than predicting the weather, that if the weatherman tells me it's a 70% chance of rain today, I'm taking my umbrella, and if he says it's a 10% chance, I'm probably leaving it at home. And every once in a while he's wrong. But again, most of the time they're right. And that's kind of the way you would look at it in terms of prediction. Another thing I always tell people, if you're going to a new reader, and it's a really great test because there's so many of those horrible people out there that are trying to tell people they're cursed and take advantage of them and defraud them of their life savings and so forth. And the news still carries plenty of stories of people that have done that. But I always tell them, whip out your cell phone and say, do you mind if I can record the reading or have a friend sit with me if there's someone there with you? And I guarantee you that the people that are really good readers don't have a problem with it. The people that are going to defraud you they'll always make an excuse. Well, no, it would disturb the spirits or it would be too distracting or whatever. And the reason for that, of course, is that in the end, they don't want you going to the cops with a recording or a witness. They just want it to be your word against theirs if something happens. So it's a great way to test. And I think any reader that hesitates if you ask if you can record the reading or have someone sit in with you, I would definitely be very suspicious of. So that's a really good way to spot some of the bad ones, so to speak. But Krista's right. I think everyone has their unique gifts and talents and abilities. And it's really finding a reader that kind of matches, I think, what it is that you need in that moment. I remember we had a friend of ours that was a reader. We read at the bookstore that we do readings at. And she didn't do any prediction. She was a healer sort of type of person. And somebody went in looking for a predictive reading, and the person there recommended her, and the client was very disappointed because it wasn't at all what she wanted, and she was looking for something completely different. So keep that in mind. And hopefully later in the show we'll also get into how to approach a reading to get a good reading. But I'm going to kick it back to Krista. Krista, and what are your thoughts?
I wanted to add, too, that once you're in and you've chosen a reader, how do you know that the reader is actually legitimate? And how do you know if the reader is actually a good reader? And so one has to define what a good reader is. And to me, there are certain traits or qualities I personally look for in a reader. And I've been fairly fortunate picking my own readers through time. And I think that some of it's my instincts with people. I have pretty good instincts when I first meet somebody. And I have found readers on Oceanfront Walk that are really quite exceptional, and I've found them in sort of, other venues as well. And I've largely had good experiences with readers. Only a couple times have I had sort of a bad reading and there was nothing in it, but not a bad reader. And one of the things I think is important as a reader is to have some standards and have what I would say ethics personally. I think one should know what those are, and I think that it's important to be very honest with people, and if possible, as kind as possible in terms of your delivery. We're all human. I've made mistakes as far as being kind of snappy with people now and then, and I've known it, but that's different. My intention is basically to help the person. And so when a good reader is not going to overly emphasize themselves, they're going to emphasize their the need, or not the need, but just the desire to help you. And so it's not about looking good. It's not about bragging. I do think some readers, some of it I think is just poor marketing, but I do think that people don't realize how they come across sometimes very kind of arrogant and very overly confident with their tools. And I've been in metaphysics my whole life, and I am still not sure about a lot of things and how they work. And when I see someone that's so sure about things that are readers, I question that, because I don't think that's the nature of metaphysics. I think it's good to have a healthy self-esteem, to be proud of yourself. But I think I think there's not enough humility in the reading world. There's a lot of showiness, and to the point where maybe because of social media, it's like there's a certain look sometimes that readers have. And okay, when I was growing up, and so I went to readers in the 80s and 90s, most readers just looked very much like ordinary people at the time. There was no glamour to the reading business then. Now there's a lot of cool factor, there's a lot of glamour. As a result, you do have to sort through that. Now, I'm not saying that all people that have that persona are like that, because sometimes that's who they are. Even if they weren't reading, they'd be kind of like rock star looking or whatever it is, and that's just them. But there is a difference. You can kind of tell because they're like that before they got into the reading business, and so I think that that kind of disturbs me a little bit. There's this kind of glamour around the reader. It's not about the reader. It's about the reading. It's about the person going for the reading. It's about helping and advising people in ways that will hopefully bring more harmony and answers in their life. And that's, to me, what readers have done for me. So I've had a lot of really good role models. All the readers I went to when I was younger were super kind, helpful. Some lectured at me in a good way. I needed it. But I always felt very supported and by them. So that's sort of another thing. I would say it's important that you really, if you feel right away the reader is just not being kind or nice to you and is overly negative, feel free to get up and leave. And especially in the beginning of a reading is if you really don't feel the person's interested in you or is concerned about you, then I would say it's not going to be a good fit, even if they have a gift. because that I don't even like that word gift, even if they're competent, because that kind of ego is going to basically bleed into the reading at some point.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. And it really is not about proving anything. It's about really helping the person you're reading for. And one of the things I always tell people, there's no such thing as a bad reading, just bad readers. And a reading basically should never be overly negative and doom and gloom. And so, I always tell people a reading should either be good news or good advice, but either way it should be helpful and constructive. Now, people will ask, what do you tell us if there's going to be something bad? And it's like, well, you're not going to lie to the person. That's not really fair either. But a lot of it is how you phrase things and phrasing it in such a way that it's not going to come across as really scary and negative. And so rather than saying, your granny's going to kick the bucket, it's nice to spend more time with granny. So you're kind of giving that constructive, positive kind of advice to the person and yet still being honest and truthful with them. And so, as I said, good news or good advice. But I think that you've got to be there to help the person. And it's not, as Krista said, it's not about proving how great you are or how infallible you are. None of us are infallible. And readings are always about interpretation. And sometimes we misinterpret a little bit. That's the nature of being a human being. But, the heart has to be in the right place. The sincerity has to be there. And the one thing I'll say also as a client, for God's sake, don't bully your reader into telling you what you want them to tell you. You came and asked for an objective opinion or advice. So I think listen to what the reader has to say. As I said, we're not gods. So if you really don't agree with it, then feel free to reject it and do what you think is best. It's your life. But I think that when I've had clients where they're trying to bully you into basically telling them what they want to hear, and that sort of defeats the purpose of getting a reading, really, for the most part.
That's really true. There's an element, I would call this section about manners. And when I was in Halifax, living in Halifax, I was, before I met Michael, and I used to go to, all kinds of little readers. There was this elderly woman that would read in the park there, and she was kind of well known and very inexpensive. And so you would wait in line, and then it was like $10 or something, really cheap. And so I'm waiting in line. There's a couple ahead of me, and she'd been reading a lot for a while, and she paused right before the couple ahead of me saying, "Excuse me, I have to go to the washroom. I'll be right back." And the couple said, "What do you mean? We have a plane to catch." And I remember thinking, like, that's a little old lady. Why would you not let her go to the bathroom? I mean, your approach to readers, it should be a human approach, but you're also approaching the archetype of the oracle. And in some ways, I kind of wish we'd go back to the Greek times where it would take you like a year to get to see the Delphic oracle, and you were only allowed one question. And I think that I personally have been the recipient of some very bad manners at times. And I have to admit, I was a little shocked at first because I would never dream of going somewhere where I'm seeking advice for someone that I think may have some wisdom for me, that I would mistreat them so much. And it's certainly going to be two ways, but I've had my encounters of people coming in and arguing with me from the very beginning, which is one of my roles. If you start arguing with me, and we haven't even started, what I do now is say, well, we can do two things. We can stop and not do the reading because I simply cannot think if you're arguing with me, or you can stop arguing and we'll get right into it, because sometimes people will drop it. The one woman said, "Oh, I didn't even know I was doing that." I said, "Yeah, I haven't even said anything and you're arguing." And you're not approaching the oracle with some sort of respect. And granted, respect is earned, but remember, I think that's why readings are so powerful, is I don't think people really understand the power of the archetype of the oracle. And this is how I finally made peace with why do some people initially go to anybody? Because that person represents this really powerful archetype that we all know exists in some level. So you are that representation. And to me, it's important to approach people with at least some sense of respect. And certainly you don't have to just believe everything someone says. You can always use your discernment, even if it's your favorite reader you go to. And I would certainly say the same about manners. It goes both ways for readers to be professional. And one of the things that sort of I find a little perplexing is the amount of readers that keep their clients waiting. And I understand now and then being late, that's legitimate. But I've seen in more than one occasion readers that are good at what they do, but they're always late and they keep their clients waiting. To me, that's just a disrespect to the client. And like I said, it seems to be almost part of the profession on some level because people work for themselves, I guess, and they think they can just kind of come and go as they please, which of course you can, but still remembering that you have said you're going to be here at a certain time to meet that person, or whether it's a phone reading. And I think that there's a lot of that sort of unprofessionalism with readings that I think readers get away with because of the eccentric side of the reading business.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think also, as Krista was saying, don't start by beating up your reader. And I won't generally read for someone who's abusive. I don't mind if they're a little needy and so forth. I can deal with that. But if they're going to be very disrespectful, and then why would I want to work with that person, basically? What would that say about my own self-esteem? I remember at the Bodhi Tree, this guy came along once, and I was sitting there doing readings, and he went on and on about how this was all bogus and I was a fraud, and basically being almost belligerent. And a few minutes into the conversation, this client came along, "Oh, that last reading was amazing, and everything turned out exactly the way that you said, and it was so helpful, and thank you so much." And then off they went. And of course, now dude wants a reading. And I'm like, guess what? It ain't going to happen. You missed your chance. And because now I don't like you, I'm not going to read for you. And so that was the deal. So again, try not to beat up your readers too much. Another thing that I think, now in a reading itself, what I like to do is often double and triple check things. So I've got 3 different readings I'll do, and the idea, I want to see how they all agree. So if we do 2 or 3 different styles of spread and they all sort of reach the same conclusion, then I always feel a lot stronger about the prediction, so to speak. So I am actually double checking and triple checking myself as we kind of go through the reading to try and ensure some accuracy. Having said that, there are those people that will go to 10 different readers a day for 10 days. And to me, that doesn't help. You're just confusing yourself. I think if you're going to ask for a reading and get a reading from someone, I think in my mind, give it some time and see how it plays out and give it a chance before you run off and get another reading from somebody else. Because I see these people basically at the end of the day, they either totally confuse themselves, so it really negates the whole process, or in another example of that, I guess, or another symptom is often they're doing nothing but getting readings. They're not actually doing anything to further their life. And I always said, get a reading and then put a little bit of time and work into life, see how it progresses, and then come back at a future point. And so with that, people often ask me, how often should I get a reading? And well, in general readings, honestly, the very most I would think quarterly, and that's even being generous. I think I do mine maybe twice a year. And so I don't think it should be real frequent when we talk about general readings. I think you should take the reading, let it work itself out at least 3 or 4 months, and then come back. And the only exception to that, again, if you're going to do something, again, in between on a very specific subject. So I've been offered a job. Is this the right job for me or not? Or I've got 2 different job offers that I need to choose from. So it's not really a general reading. You're just looking at a very specific instance. And I think those kind of readings you could do fairly frequently. But as I said, please, like I said, don't argue with the reader to the point that you're just asking them to tell you what you want to hear, and don't get so many readings that you just basically end up confusing yourself and negating the whole process.
I totally agree with that whole getting too many readings. And again, it's actually also watering down the oracle. So to me, if a reading, there is some element of respecting the whole process. And I've gotten a lot out of one reading for several years, depending on what the reading is. If I've gotten a long astrology reading that's over a year and a half, I just keep going over it. And I also give myself time to apply the lessons that are, or even the advice in the reading. So you really do need that. Another thing I wanted to talk about was when looking for a reader, is one of the things I would say is maybe initially stay away from someone that does everything. So if somebody says they do astrology, tarot, channeling, healing, I'm not saying people cannot have more than one skill, but astrology alone, to me, can take many, many years to do well for others. In fact, that can be your whole thing. Most astrologers I've gone to, that's all they do because it's so complex. And there's different ways you can use astrology. But we live longer and we have a lot more information. So certainly people can have more than one skill. But maybe in the beginning, find someone that maybe is more of an expert in a certain area and also how they use that tool. Because again, I might want a certain kind of astrology reading. I think there is an overemphasis sometimes with people that market the readers on the tools itself. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that because I guess there's people that think it's better to have a tool and not And then there are people that think it's better to not have a tool, because I've heard it from, mediums saying that they have to prove themselves because they don't have a tool, which I didn't know until recently. And then people that do cards, especially, I've gotten things, oh, you just read the cards. And I'm like, well, I'd like to see you try, go right ahead and see what what you can do with them. So I think that there are some, people like certain tools. Like there are people really drawn to cards, and there's a reason why that is. I think it's because we grew up playing card games. It's visual. Their images are really cool. So I think that that's fine. But really, it's what a reader does with the tool. I went to a man once who used crystals. He was from New Jersey, and he worked in the store I used to work at, Mirabai Books. I forget his name. He was a very down-to-earth reader, though, and he did the most interesting thing. He'd have you pick the crystal that you felt drawn to. He'd put it on his third eye, and then he'd give you some practical advice. It was not like your higher self is talking to you. It was like I was asking him about moving. He's like, well, no, I think, I think you need to go to a colder climate, not Hawaii. I think that's where you really would do better. And he told me why. And at that time, I hadn't had my relocation chart done, which I did have it done. And that backed up what he told me. So he gave me but it was a really unusual way of using the crystals. And I've never met anyone since, and that's all he did. He never made a big deal about it, though. That was just the way he did it, So your tool, anyone can work with any kind of tool if they have a passion for it, as long as it's something that's effective. But, to me, going to a person because of a tool, unless you're looking for a specific experience, it's not really relevant necessarily for you getting a really great reading.
Yeah, and now another thing, too, I think beware of people that just do cold reading. And I've seen people, again, that will just pump you for information and tell you back what you told them. And that's kind of what we mean by cold reading, or they're just throwing out a whole bunch of different guesses until something connects. I don't think that's a legitimate process. Now, sometimes I do like to have a little background information to structure a reading, but it still should be coming from me, not from you, to the greatest extent. So a lot of that might be, do you have an existing relationship or not? Because I want to know if we need to look at this as sort of finding love, or do we need it as analyzing the relationship you have? And there's two different ways to structure the reading that are more effective, depending on what it is. But that's about where we end. And at that point, I'm not going to ask them a whole lot about how the relationship's going and anything else. I'm just going to jump into the reading and start talking. But you shouldn't be pumping them for information all the time. And some readers are very, very good at basically just chatting you up and getting the information they need, and they're just giving it back to you. And that's not really a reading. That's a cold reading. And some of the famous psychics are very good at cold reading. And that episode of South Park where they make fun of a certain famous psychic as the biggest douche in the universe will give you everything you need to know about cold reading. So as I said, watch out for those folks. Watch out for readers that are, like Krista was saying, incredibly, I can do everything brilliantly and I'm just a master of everything. And, we've been working with tarot for 24 years, and sometimes I still think I'm learning it. It's a never-ending process. And I think to do one or two things incredibly well can take, decades to really properly develop. So I think that, and then, again, it's not about the glamour. As Krista said, it can be someone tossing bones in a cave. It can be a tarot reader. It can be a medium. It should match kind of what you're looking for. So if you're looking for contacting the dead, probably tossing bones isn't going to work. Is not the best format to use for that kind of a reading. So try and find someone who has a skill set that sort of dovetails with what you're looking for. If you're looking for prediction, and then tarot works really well. Astrology can work well. Numerology can work well. A lot of different things. And I wanted to talk about prediction again as a way of understanding it too when it does come to probability. And the example I always use of prediction is the weather. And I say, what if I was to ask you to describe the weather today? Well, you can do that. You can say it's kind of a little chilly out today. I had to wear my jacket to work. The sun was out, though, and it was nice, and it wasn't too windy, and you can describe the day very well. If I said, what was the weather like a year ago on this date, you can call the weather office, and they'll tell you what the humidity was, the temperature was, the wind speed was, whether it was cloudy or not, and they'll give you a very accurate description. But if I said, what will the weather be a year from today, who are you going to call? So at that point, if you're smart, you call the weather office again. You say, send me over all the data you have for this date, going back as far as you can, and you'll analyze it. You'll say, okay, it tends to be this temperature, it tends to be sunny, it tends to be this. I've noticed a little shift in the progression. So it's starting to get a little bit warmer every year. So I'm going to add a couple degrees. And you'll make a prediction based on probability again. Now, if you've done a good job of analyzing, you'll be right more than you'll be wrong, and that's the nature of prediction. But it's an analytical ability, technically, and it's about really analyzing patterns and then reaching conclusions about how they're going to unfold. So a lot of readers that don't really develop their problem-solving ability, their puzzle-solving ability, their analytical abilities, actually don't make very good predictors at the end of the day because they're not very good at analyzing the information. So, get to know your reader, chat with them, make sure that you feel like you're on the same wavelength and that you can relate to each other. And then again, reading, it's like an art. And some people, stylistically, it's what you're into, and the other person, it's not for them. It's just not the style that they need to relate to. And again, it doesn't make the person a good or bad reader. It's just a difference of styles. Much like I can look at a painting and I fall in love with it, and Krista looks at it and kind of goes, it doesn't work for me, and it doesn't mean the person was a poor artist. It just means that stylistically it's speaking to me and not to her. So you'll find that with readings too, that every reader has their own delivery, their own style. And when you find somebody that you can really relate to, then it makes it that much better, the experience.
I would like to talk a little bit about a cost of a reading too. And of course, it varies greatly depending on a couple of things. One is where you live. So, I personally probably would charge even less if I didn't live in LA because our rents are really high here. So we have a different cost of living here than some people say if you're living in India. Having said that, it still should be something I would think is reasonable for the area or for reading and also for your experience. One of the things that really bothers me is when I see someone starting out professionally as a reader, and I know it, and they charge the same as someone that's been doing it 15 years. First of all, it gives you no place to go. And secondly, I can't be the only one that notices that. Michael and I, we started out doing, $10 readings on the waterfront in Halifax. It was very inexpensive. And you end up doing more readings that way, too. If you have an inexpensive, you'll get more experience. So that does kind of trouble me. But I would not pay $1,000 for a reading. I don't care. There's nothing you can tell me that will be worth $1,000. Even if I had the money for that, it's ridiculous. And there are people certainly that have done that. But, I've heard from people that have gone to some of these people, one was Sylvia Brown, that didn't always have a great reading from it. And if you're going to be charging $1,000, you better make sure it's a fantastic reading every time. So when you want to look at, you can kind of tell like what's in your area, the reading rates of your area, because I think it is fair to say that in big cities, if you're going to go to see a reader in person, it might be more than if I was in a little town somewhere. And there are even people that don't want to charge for readings because they feel that's unethical. But the way I see it is basically they're charging for my time. They're not really charging for the magical side of the tarot. So to me, I'm okay with it. And also because I'm willing to go and pay for readings. So if I'm willing to go to pay people for readings, and I've enjoyed doing that, then I think it's fair for me to charge as well. So look for something. Certainly, I've seen, honestly, even people that charge $400-$500. I've seen that are even well known. I just can't imagine doing that, to tell you the truth. And you can sometimes look at the person that's maybe, this works particularly in astrology. If you look at some of the top astrologers that are well known and been in it for a while, you can look at their rates and get an idea of what someone that's been doing it for a very long time is expected to get. And also, there are some people that will do sliding scale. So don't be afraid to ask if you really do need a break and you really want to go to that reader. But please don't take advantage of readers that way, because I had that happen to me and I stopped doing it because of that reason. I learned some people that said they were broke were getting ready to buy a condominium. So you can say, well, Krista, you're a psychic. Should you not have picked that up? Well, I don't really use my abilities that way. I trust people. And certainly I notice people and I notice what's going on with people. And if I start to see through observation that they're not truthful, then of course I'm going to withdraw my offers. But I think it's important that people don't try to scam the reader as well.
I do think at the same time, and as Krista mentioned too, the reader shouldn't be into it just for the money. So if that's their only purpose in doing the reading, ultimately it should be to help somebody. There are times where I haven't taken pay for a reading because I felt that it just wasn't the right thing to do. Someone just lost their partner, or something that it just seemed like it wasn't right. I'd be profiting off someone's misery in a sense, or it was just felt right to want to help without really doing that. Another time too, which has made a difference for people, I think. Every once in a while you'll have somebody who's really down and out, and yet they're getting a reading to try and sort of turn things around. And I had a person once say, I really can't afford this, but I want this to be an act of faith, so I'm going to spend the money anyway and get the reading. And so I said, sure. So we did the reading. And afterwards she went to pay, and I said, that's okay, you don't have to pay me. I said, that's fine, I know that you can't afford it. And she said, well, I wanted it to be an act of faith. And I said, well, it was, because you were prepared to do it. You don't have to do it, but you were definitely prepared to do it. I said, that was your act of faith, and you can take that and go with it. But I thought every once in a while you'll do something really generous or nice for a person that's been struggling, and they'll cry. It was the first time in maybe a long time someone has really done something really just nice for them, and so really you can touch people's hearts that way. Now, I do want to come back to prediction just again for a quick second too, and I know I talked about probability, but that doesn't mean I don't believe there's a validity to it, and there really is. And I use a personal example of something I couldn't have changed or couldn't have affected in any way, or the person, and those are the ones that fascinate me, is when you can't really influence things. And Krista can verify this story, but there was a person that I'd read for that called up several months later, and I'd read for them in the fall, I think, early fall, and this was in the spring. And I wasn't home. He talked to Krista. He said, your husband won't remember me, but he said he did a reading for me last fall, and the last thing I asked about was travel. And he said, and everything looked great except for January. And he said, for some reason, he didn't like January. So just based on that, I canceled all my travel plans in January. And he said, every January I spent visiting my friends in Haiti. I would have been there for the earthquake, and I would have probably been killed because the hotel collapsed that I usually stay at. So again, how do you know that? And I'm not saying I knew there was an earthquake in Haiti, but I just knew that based on his life patterns, something about that didn't feel right to me. And again, that's sort of that precognitive thing where you've kind of got to feel. But I won't tell you that I specifically saw an earthquake in Haiti. I just knew that time period for some reason felt uncomfortable to me. So there is something to prediction where I think some tools and tarot and different methods, that there does seem to be a way that it does somehow tie into that idea of future events. And it's really fascinating to me when it does that.
It's true, and I wanted to talk a little bit more the difference between precognitive and some of the other clairs. So and this is my own research, and this is my own going to readers. But my understanding of even clairvoyance is not necessarily predictive. Clairvoyance is the ability to see things from a distance and pick up some things through imagery. And it's not necessarily predictive, though precognitive can be put under clairvoyance as a form of clairvoyance. Precognitive is the only word I've come across for predictive stuff. And then there's clairaudience, clairsentience, you get messages. But again, they're not really necessarily associated, at least through the books I've read, and with being able to predict well. So prediction appears to need some form of a tool. The exceptions to that are deeply spiritual and religious people. And there are examples like, Cayce, and though he was wrong with some of his predictions, supposedly California is supposed to be in the water already. But he was deeply religious. And there is an element where I think that sometimes very spiritual religious people do see things from a grander perspective. And they do, because they're trying to help humanity, in a sense. So I personally think if I'm going for predictive work, or prediction of some kind, I prefer someone who uses a tool, numerology, astrology, tarot. And the other thing about developing predictive abilities, I had to develop mine more than Michael. And I would say I have some clairvoyance, even though I don't put it on my flyer because I don't think it's always accurate. I don't think I'm a super duper clairvoyant. So I have become more precognitive because of the tarot and Kabbalah. And so what you have to be able to do as well as analyze and also practice is see patterns and get used to the concept of patterns, because, nature loves patterns, and you look at cycles, and after a while you say, oh, that I'm familiar with that pattern. Or once in a while I'll see a pattern I know I've never seen because, well, that's a bizarre looking pattern, So then I have to really sit down and analyze it and see how I feel about it. So it doesn't sound very glamorous, but it's actually quite fascinating to do. I really enjoy that part, the analysis, that sense of certainly you can have intuitive moments, but that's all based on the fact that you're logically, analytically, you're certainly considering your feelings about things, why that card stands out for me today and it didn't yesterday. But I think that from my understanding, precognitive is really the main ability associated with the ability to predict the future in any way, whether it's short term or longer term. I have I have a funny little story that's not that significant, but it amused me because one of my clients came back and said 4 years ago to the month, I had predicted she was going to be doing something in radio, and she remembered it. I did not. And I remember thinking, like, I know I got that through analysis. I did not get that through anything more than analyzing and my experience with Kabbalah. And she was nice enough to come back and tell me that it had actually happened. And at the time, she said she didn't even understand the radio part, that she wasn't even interested in it. So you could say I planted the seed in her mind, but I really don't think so based on how she viewed it and also my own experience of it. So that's, to me, the difference if I'm going to someone that's doing predictive work, which, by the way, there's all kinds of readings out there. You don't have to go and get a predictive reading to have a really wonderful experience and something useful. Just so you know, perhaps you want to look at your relationships in your life, or with the medium, you want to speak to some of your people that have died and you want that connection. And so there's many kinds of readings. And to me, they're all good. They're all necessary. They're all good. I've personally had all kinds of experience with different kinds of readers. I really value all of mine.
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of touch on something Krista was saying too, but about readings in general. I think that you've got to also understand that the reader's going to interpret things based on their own frame of reference. And so if I'm looking at something, I'm sort of trying to speculate what that is based on the knowledge I have of what it could be. But it's a very big world out there, and there could be a whole bunch of things that are similar. So someone says, is this Arizona? Well, yeah, I've been to Arizona, and it's kind of hot and a little bit deserty and so forth, and maybe that fits, but maybe there's like 5 other places that are very similar. So we're kind of looking at it in a broad way that way too. So that's one of the tricky things about sort of specific stuff, is we're limited by our own knowledge. And it's like people come to me and that they want to know about health and diagnosing illness, and it's like, well, I'm not a doctor, I've not studied anatomy, so even if I see something, I may not actually know what the heck I'm looking at, because to me, I don't have the background rationally to be able to interpret and understand what I might be seeing, even if I do see something. But then I do want to offer some advice to new readers too, and I always tell this to my students, is they start out as a new reader, and as Krista was saying, please don't charge like $1,000 an hour and put all that pressure on yourself to start with to be exceptional. And when we started out, we used to go to the waterfront in Halifax, and we'd go down in the evening, we had a little lantern, and we took a little piece of plywood and covered it with some fabric that we could set on our lap, and we put a sign out, readings $10 each or something, or $20. People would be coming from the pubs and the restaurants in the evening. We were there by the ocean, and we'd start at about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and at 2 o'clock we'd still have people lined up, to get readings from us. But we got a lot of experience that way, and without a lot of pressure. It was really great. But watch this tendency that people have when they're new to rush out to try and get a job at a new age bookstore. And one of the things I want to say about reading at bookstores, you're going to deal with a lot of politics for the other readings. You can deal with a lot of cattiness from the other readers, a lot of competitiveness. And as a beginning reader, you probably don't really need that. So you use your imagination a little bit. Maybe there's a coffee shop down the street. There's a little park where you could do readings. There's all kinds of places now that are very open to it, where you can sort of create your own little space to settle in comfortably, get some experience without the politics and the drama that a lot of new age bookstores bring with them. And I think you'll find that it's going to establish you and build your confidence a lot more successfully. So it's a much better way, I think, for new readers to start out than sort of plunging right into the deep end by charging excessive amounts of money or putting themselves in a situation where they have to compete with other readers and when they're still kind of getting their feet under them.
That's really good advice. And I'd also add, if you do at some point decide to apply to bookstores or places that have readers, do not exaggerate your flyer. I used to hire the readers at the bookstore, at the Bodhi Tree bookstore, and I did have a file where I was keeping some of them were just so over the top. Now, granted, I think some people just didn't know how to write a resume, but some of them really were exaggerating. Honestly, just be truthful about whatever your background is. I actually hired someone that had very little experience, after she did the reading. I liked her personality. It was solid. And I knew that she was just telling the truth about everything. And she was a fill-in for us, and she worked great. It's really about being honest. I also once caught someone who put on their flyer that they'd been a reader at the Bodhi Tree bookstore, and I knew all the readers. And so I actually confronted the person, because that was at the time, the Bodhi Tree still had some sort of prestige if you worked at the Bodhi Tree for some reason. And she was trying to use that. So please be honest with wherever you're coming from, and be specific. Don't just say, I studied with a master. Well, tell us who the master was. And if you're self-made, say that. We learn tarot ourselves. There's nothing wrong with just saying who you are. Everyone has a story. You want to find your own unique voice and your own way of showing your path. You could talk about how you came to readings, because everyone has some interesting things about how they became a reader. And I also feel like if you want to be a reader, pick something you're passionate about and not something that's popular. It can be sometimes popular, but it's your passions lead you forward in your life. You could pick something that no one does, and it might be hard initially, but you're going to get somewhere with it. And also, you're just going to enjoy it. So if you want to, it's not an easy business. It's not easy listening to people's problems and, figuring out how to handle certain personalities. I've had some very harrowing readings with people that have lost their homes, abortions. And so another piece of advice I would say for readers is, maybe don't get fully invested professionally until you're mature enough to handle the questions that are coming after you, which does not mean you can't do readings earlier, and you can start reading early in life. Even when you're young, you can read cards and learn about astrology. But going into the professional world, it's also about what you're going to be dealing with. So in some ways, it might be easier for people to wait at least until they're 25, and maybe a little longer if you want to be a full-time professional reader. If you do that, I would say perhaps limit certain topics if you're not comfortable with talking about someone going through divorce because you haven't even had a boyfriend or a girlfriend. That's legitimate, and say, well, I don't do that topic. Or have a mentor. You can have a mentor that you go to about certain things, and it's certainly, you can say no to certain topics. I still do certain things. I don't read about the stock market. It's just something I don't do. I'm not an expert. I don't feel comfortable with it. I tried it a little bit. At one point, I had a client that sort of asked me to do it. So I was kind of game, and I was actually getting some good hits. And then he started coming a lot, and I was like, no, we're not going down this road. I'm not equipped for this. I don't have any license for a stock market, and I don't want to get pulled into this I felt it was a little addictive. So that's another thing I would sort of advise for people getting into the reading business.
Yeah, and Krista's right. You're going to get some questions that are pretty intense, and you have to be prepared to be able to handle that. And then keep in mind, ultimately it's about helping that person, so trying to guide them in some way, give them the right advice. And there's a gravity to that. There's definitely times where we agonize, did we give the right advice? And, you can't really do this job if you don't care about your clients and want them to be healthy and happy. And so there's a lot of responsibility. I mean, you're doing something that essentially is messing with someone's life, and that's a big deal. And so for me, I think I'm always kind of aware of the gravity of what we're doing. I always am conscientious about, trying to be exact with the words that I choose to make sure they fully understand what I'm trying to tell them. Because, reading sometimes, and this again is something that you'll have to be aware of as a reader, but also as a client, is the ability to twist things that the reader says. So you'll hear people and they'll say, well, you said this, and that's not at all what I meant. They've taken something completely out of context. So again, try and, if you're a reader, choose your words very, very precisely and make sure that they understand exactly what you're trying to tell them. And as a person getting the reading, again, make sure that you're listening to what the reader is saying and not just trying to twist it in some way. So a lot of it demands incredible objectivity on the part of both people. And this is why I always say, ultimately it's a search for truth. And whether you're giving a reading or you're getting a reading, it's all about truth. And so you should come into it with a very neutral expectation that I'm not expecting to hear certain things or anything else. I'm just open to the message, interested in what it might have to say, and then, we'll kind of look at that after and apply it. But I think having expectations going into the reading, I think, is setting yourself up to really twist the reading or to, as I said, people end up arguing with you because you're not telling them what they want to hear. And so again, try to approach a reading with no expectations, just with a very open mind.
It's really true. And I wanted to bring up a quote I found in a book about Edgar Cayce, I read about 3 years ago. And it's from the book An American Prophet by, I think it's Sidney Kirkpatrick. I'm not quite sure. I should have written the author down. It's been a while. So he had a couple of places where Cayce talks about getting the best results from a reading. And I was really impressed by this one quote. So Ketchum, who was someone that worked with Cayce, said that when Ketchum got the best results from Cayce was when a person genuinely wanted help for the reasons that they had stated, and when ultimately the person receiving the information had good intentions. A person saying one thing and thinking something different resulted in a miscommunication. Information that would hurt or harm someone would simply not be given. And Edgar Cayce is certainly one of the most documented clairvoyants of the 20th century. So I thought that made me feel really a lot better about certain people I've read for who really do come in with an agenda. Now, I've come to recognize with the cards what that looks like. But perhaps because I always went to readers really wanting the reading and being very open to whatever it was I wanted at the time. I didn't have any kind of, agenda, and I didn't want the reading to go a certain way, or I wasn't testing. That's another thing we didn't talk about a lot, is going in and testing readers unless they want you to. It's like you've come and you've agreed to be tested. That does nothing for anybody. It's ridiculous, And again, it's this kind of disrespect for the oracle, because there's definitely places you can do that, and there are people willing to participate in studies like that in research. So really coming in with that idea that you're very open to what that particular reader has to say. And one of the problems I had as a reader when I first started was now and then a reader would come to me for a reading and they had an attitude towards me. I didn't have as much confidence, so now I can handle that. But they would sometimes try to read the cards that I was reading from my point of view. And I think that if you're a reader going for a reading, it's important you put aside that you're a reader, that you are there to hear what that reader has to say. There are some readers that I think that's how they sort of size up the competition, particularly at bookstores where people sometimes will. Not everyone does this. Some people exchange readings because they really want to. And then some, I think, it's just to test the reader and see what their competition is. And, it's not a competition in the long run, people. I mean, you can be competitive in the sense of knowing the market and knowing the rates and maybe be inspired to do better because of a reader. But it's such a subjective world out there. And you really have to get a little bit of a thick skin about, why did this person suddenly go to this other person after 10 years of seeing you? It's okay. They needed that person. It's okay. You'll get other clients as well. So kind of let that go.
Yeah, it's funny, Krista. I remember we were talking about this earlier, that we just moved to LA and we were kind of trying to get ourselves established. And we were struggling a little bit, to be honest. And there was a famous reader. I'm not going to mention her by name because I don't want to get into politics too much. But she's a very respected author and well-known, person in the pagan community and so forth. And she was visiting LA and doing readings in Long Beach. So we drove down to Long Beach. I thought this is a chance to meet this person and get a reading. And we can't really afford it, but we're going to make that effort. And we did, and we paid, I forget how much it was. It wasn't outrageous, but it was still...
It's $35 for 15 minutes.
$35 for 15 minutes. So it wasn't outrageous. But to us, when we were struggling to survive, it was still an act of faith, as I said earlier. So we sit down to get this reading, and it's a 15-minute reading from this person. And she draws, I think it was like 3 tarot cards or something, or some little pattern of tarot cards. And then she looked at us, she said, "Now, what does this mean to you?" I'm thinking, bitch, I just paid you to tell me what it means to you. I want to hear your opinion as to what this is. And I have my opinion, but I want to hear your opinion. But her whole reading consisted of making you do the reading yourself for $35. And I was so blown away and disappointed by that. And I think for the whole time, I don't think she ever told us what she thought it meant. It was all just asking us what we thought it meant. So I think that was probably the most singularly unsatisfying reading I've ever gotten in my life, and from someone who is relatively famous and well known. So as I said, listen to what the reader has to say. Let them express their point of view about it. You're free to agree or disagree with them. They're human and they're not gods, and they may misinterpret. So if you strongly feel otherwise, then honor that. But at least listen to what they're telling you and try and look at it with an objective frame of mind. And I think you'll end up with a much better experience. But as I said, that cold reading stuff, and that was just the worst. So anyway, watch out for that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, that was funny. And that was actually a high rate during that time. It was the 90s. So that was considered, nowadays it wouldn't be, but it was. And that was almost 20 years ago. So that was a lot of money in general for readings. The other thing I'm going to quickly mention is I'm not a big fan of Yelp. And I'll tell you why. I absolutely know people that have tried to make someone look better on Yelp. And I've also known people that have been attacked by other readers through Yelp, and they've managed to get through somehow through fake accounts or whatever. Yelp's supposed to have some way to protect that. But the thing that was really compelling for me was recently someone came to me. I don't even know how this man found me because he came to my home and must have found our website. And at the end of the reading, he really liked it. And he told me for some reason he had gone to a 5-starred Yelp reader. And when he got there, the woman just promoted her stuff and really tried to sell him everything she could. So stay away from readers that do that when you go for a reading and they want to sell you immediately products that you haven't even asked about. So he said he was polite, and he didn't even mention what the quality of the reading was, by the way. He was just so turned off by that he paid for the reading anyway, said, I'll just never go back. And she had a 5-star Yelp review. So Yelp is not really the greatest place, except if you read some of the reviews and you really think the reviews look legitimate. Like you can kind of tell if it's, not overly exaggerated. And I went and this person told me about this. And then also you can look at the person reviewing and see how many reviews they have. And if they have none, that's not necessarily a good, no other reviews, There's also, I think sometimes people don't like psychics, and you'll see, if you go on, you'll see they only put negative reviews about psychics on their reviews. I saw that with one woman. So definitely be careful with the Yelp. I personally wouldn't go just based on Yelp. I would rather go through some other method in any state.
And, as Krista was saying earlier, too, a legitimate reader doesn't mind talking to you about what they do and letting you get a feel for them, and even before you start the reading process. And as she said, if it's not going well, don't be afraid to stop it either. You're allowed to do that. Please don't let anyone tell you you're cursed. For God's sake, there's too much of that stuff still out there, and it's not at all. We did a show on curses way back. We'll probably should do another one at some point. But again, it's just, you're so unlikely. I mean, we've done 50,000 readings, and in terms of people that legitimately had some kind of a negative energy like that projected at them, probably a handful of times. So it's incredibly rare. So if someone's telling you that, and of course, then if they're in the next breath telling you that they can fix that curse for you and you just have to open a charge count at Tiffany's for them, then run away. Don't let that person inside your psyche. But I think if you find a really authentic reader that is genuine, that's heart in the right place, that they're a little intelligent, that they respect the process and what they do, and they really do want to help, and you approach them with a healthy attitude yourself, with an open mind to the process and a curiosity about what it might say, I think it can be an amazing experience that can really help you in many ways in life. So, but it's a healthy client and a healthy reader. It's a co-created experience at the end of the day. So those are my thoughts.
It is. It's a co-created experience. And for readers, I feel so blessed when I come upon someone coming for a reading that really is open. And it allows the reading to go deeper. It's just natural. If I'm going to the reader and I'm very open, you can still be discerning and skeptical, but I'm open to the process. I'm open to this idea that there's something we can tap in together. And that's what it should be about. It's about doing this together. And also, readings can have a sense of humor. I don't know why no one talks about humor, but I've had a lot of good laughs with people. And there should be an element of enjoyment. My favorite readers I've gone to, I actually enjoyed even where it was maybe something difficult the person was talking about with me. It was still overall an enjoyable experience. I feel like that's something that should be part of a good reading for the most part.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just, as I said, it can be a lot of fun. It can be very life-changing if it's the right person. it can be a negative experience if the client is negative or the reader is negative. So it should be always, as I said, either good news or good advice, and it should always be a constructive and helpful process. And when you find something like that you can work with, it can definitely be a big asset to your life. But again, the right reader and the right client is magic, and the wrong ones, not so much. So, and with that, I'm going to let Krista finish it up because I know we're getting close to the end of the hour. But it's been a great topic, and I hope you guys found it interesting. And we'll let you wrap it up, Krista.
Thanks, Michael. Well, we really enjoyed this. Went by really fast. I enjoyed this topic. I hope it's helpful for you. Please leave comments and questions because we'll probably talk about this again in the future in some form because it's definitely one of our, passions, and probably the one reader to stay away from is, like Michael said, the ones that always say you're cursed and they want you to pay them a lot of money. Those ones stay away from generally, So that'll do it for today. We look forward to our next show with David Ullman, and we will continue exploring the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great week.